Nobody expected the judge to be the one leaving in handcuffs. When Judge Jessica Black publicly mocked Pam Bondi in open court, it looked like Bondi's case was done for. But with a single calculated move, she turned the entire courtroom on its head, leaving everyone in shock. The federal district court in downtown Manhattan was electric with anticipation. Reporters scrambled for the best angles, their cables snaking across the polished floors. The courtroom gallery was already packed. An hour before the hearing began, they were all there to witness the high-stakes corruption trial that had become a political and legal showdown. At precisely 9 a.m., Judge Black entered the courtroom, her black robe sweeping behind her with dramatic authority. At 52, she exuded the weight of her 15 years on the bench and the charisma that had made her a media darling. She struck the gavel, bringing the court to immediate silence. "The United States versus Brighton Development Corporation," the clerk called, as everyone rose. Across the room, Pam Bondi arranged her notes with steady precision. As the special prosecutor, she was no stranger to scrutiny. Conservative media praised her for her relentless pursuit of corruption. Liberal outlets questioned her credentials, but Bondi betrayed nothing, her calm demeanor and meticulous preparation unwavering. "Proceed with opening statements," Judge Black said coolly, the faint smirk on her lips betraying her anticipation of the clash to come. Bondi rose and began. In the press section, journalists leaned in, convinced they'd see Bondi humiliated. The young legal analyst whispered to her producer, "Black's going to shred her." Brighton Development faced charges of fraud and environmental violations, but politics had turned this into something bigger. Black had been appointed during a Democratic administration. Bondi was tied to Republican causes. The atmosphere was electric with the weight of these rivalries. As Bondi spoke, Judge Black's eyes narrowed, tapping her pen in a show of impatience. A bailiff who'd worked with her for years recognized the signs. Black was looking to make an example of someone today. The Brighton executives watched, confident. They'd maneuvered to have their case heard by Black, counting on her open disdain for Bondi. Bondi pressed on, unbothered by the hostile energy around her. She delivered her opening points with poise, refusing to react to the snide glances or whispered jabs. The tension in the room was thick. Every eye was on her and the judge. Then, 20 minutes in, Black interrupted. "Miss Bondi," she said, her tone dripping with contempt, "perhaps in Florida courts this circular reasoning passes for argument, but here we expect more." Laughter rippled through the gallery. Bondi paused, unfazed. "Your Honor, I was establishing—" "Yes, yes," Black cut her off with a dismissive wave. "We're all familiar with basic accounting fraud. Get to the point." The defense team exchanged smug smiles. Bondi drew a steady breath and continued. Black interrupted again, this time removing her glasses dramatically. "This court has seen corporate misconduct far beyond what you handled. In Florida, let's move past the basics." The laughter grew louder. Bondi held her ground, unflinching. "Your Honor, the complexity lies in how these transactions were concealed." "Let me guess," Black said sarcastically. "Designed to evade regulatory oversight? How groundbreaking," reporters typed furiously. The defense was delighted, but Bondi only straightened her papers, her expression focused. "Your Honor," she said, "I'd like to call our first witness." "By all means," Black sighed theatrically, "though I hope it's more substantive than your opening." As Bondi questioned the SEC's forensic accountant, Black continued her interruptions, each more pointed, each meant to chip away at Bondi's authority. But with every snide comment, Bondi grew sharper, redirecting her questions seamlessly. In the press gallery, a seasoned reporter noted the shift. This wasn't the flustered resistance of someone being humiliated. This was the calculated calm of someone waiting for her moment. That moment came 3 hours in. Bondi approached the bench with a thick legal volume. Your Honor, she said evenly, I'd like to address a matter of evidence admissibility. Black rolled her eyes. Make it quick, Miss Bondi. Bondi cited a Second Circuit case, Kellerman v. United States, 1987. Black's eyebrows rose. Kellerman, maritime jurisdiction, hardly relevant to corporate fraud. Bondi's smile was almost imperceptible. While Kellerman began as a maritime case, its appellate decision established precedent regarding evidence from regulatory inspections, precisely the situation with the SEC's examination of Brighton's accounts. For the first time, Black looked unsure. Bondi continued, pulling out another volume. She cited Hamilton Trust versus Commissioner, 2002, on the limits of regulatory power. The defense attorneys exchanged uneasy glances. Judge Black's smirk had vanished. I'm well versed in Hamilton Trust, Black said stiffly, but she accepted the book. Bondi's voice stayed measured. Then you're also familiar with Judge Thornton's concurrence, which directly addresses jurisdictional overreach in multinational cases. The clerk beside Black was now typing furiously. He slid a note across the bench. Black's eyes widened as she read. In light of these precedents, Bondi pressed, I submit that the evidence obtained from Brighton's Singapore subsidiary is inadmissible unless this court has already ruled on the multinational corporate veil doctrine outlined in Westmoreland International 2018. A quiet gasp came from the gallery. A law professor whispered, She's right. Black can't have it both ways. Black's voice was suddenly tight. Miss Bondi, are you suggesting? Not at all, Your Honor, Bondi said smoothly. I'm simply establishing the proper framework for admissibility. The courtroom had gone silent. Black flushed, realizing Bondi had meticulously studied her prior rulings and found a crack. I'll take these citations under advisement, Black said, her voice stripped of its former smugness. We'll recess for 30 minutes. As Black retreated to her chambers, the courtroom buzzed with astonished whispers. Reporters were already rewriting their stories. Bondi sat back at the prosecution table, arranging her papers with quiet satisfaction. The tide had turned. When court resumed, Chief Judge Montgomery, not Black, took the bench. His expression was grave. Due to extraordinary circumstances, he announced, I will preside for the remainder of today's proceedings. Judge Black is temporarily relieved of her duties pending an investigation. The gallery erupted in shocked murmurs. Montgomery continued, Miss Bondi, please proceed. Bondi rose, her voice calm. Thank you, Your Honor. The prosecution submits a sealed packet of communications between Judge Black and executives of Brighton Development. Correspondence that includes not only ex parte discussions, but evidence of financial transactions. As she handed over the envelope, federal agents entered the courtroom. The defense attorneys looked pale. Chief Judge Montgomery reviewed the evidence, his expression darkening with each page. When did you become aware of this, Miss Bondi? He asked. 3 days ago, Your Honor. We notified the FBI and the Department of Justice immediately. The defense scrambled, requesting a recess. Montgomery refused. This court is now concerned with the integrity of these proceedings. Bondi directed an agent to connect a laptop to the display screens. Emails appeared detailing Judge Black's direct involvement with Brighton executives and transfers of over $2 million to a Cayman Islands account. The defense team was in chaos. Bondi's own prosecutors looked stunned. She'd clearly kept this investigation private until the moment it mattered most. These communications violate multiple federal statutes, Bondi said firmly. Montgomery turned to the clerk. Contact the U.S. Marshals. Judge Black is not to leave the building. The hour-long recess stretched to 2. In that time, the FBI's corruption unit methodically confirmed the evidence. The final review left no doubt. Black had been compromised. And for years, 2 marshals entered Judge Black's chambers and emerged with her in handcuffs, her face pale and stunned. This is absurd, she protested, but the courtroom was silent as Chief Judge Montgomery spoke. This is no longer your courtroom, Miss Black. The marshals led her away, the echo of the cuffs loud in the silent room. Pam Bondi watched, her expression giving nothing away, but those who had once mocked her now looked on with newfound respect. The courtroom that had begun the day with laughter at Bondi's expense ended with the quiet fall of a judge and a powerful reminder that justice, in the end, answers to no one. The currents of expectation and prejudgment swirled around her as she laid out her initial points with calm confidence, her voice steady and measured. If she sensed the hostility emanating from the bench, she gave no indication. The atmosphere crackled with anticipation. Everyone present, from the veteran court reporters to the youngest law clerks, knew they were witnessing more than just another federal case. This was a clash of personalities, political alignments, and competing visions of justice itself. Judge Jessica Black adjusted her glasses, her mouth set in a thin line. She had already interrupted 3 attorneys this week. The gallery held its collective breath, waiting for the first judicial thunderbolt to strike Bondi's presentation. No one, least of all Judge Black herself, could have predicted how this day would end. 20 minutes into Pam Bondi's opening statement, Judge Black cleared her throat loudly. "Miss Bondi," she interrupted, not bothering to mask her contempt. "Perhaps in Florida courts this kind of circular reasoning is acceptable, but federal proceedings require a somewhat higher standard of argumentative coherence." A ripple of surprised laughter spread through the gallery. Bondi paused, her finger marking her place in her notes. "Your Honor, I was explaining the pattern of financial—" "Yes, yes," Judge Black waved dismissively. "You were explaining what any first-year law student might recognize as basic accounting fraud. I'm wondering when you'll address the actual complexities of this case." The Brighton executives exchanged pleased glances. Their attorneys scribbled notes furiously, clearly delighted by the judge's open hostility toward the prosecution. Bondi drew a deep breath. "If I may continue, Your Honor, the evidence will show that these weren't merely accounting irregularities, but a systematic—" "Miss Bondi," Judge Black interrupted again, removing her glasses for dramatic effect. "This court has handled corporate malfeasance cases that would make your experience as Florida's Attorney General seem like supervising a lemonade stand. Perhaps we could move past the remedial explanation." This time the laughter was louder. A young law student whispered to her companion, "Black is absolutely eviscerating her." Journalists typed frantically, capturing every barb. Bondi stood, perfectly still, absorbing the mockery without a visible reaction. When she spoke again, her voice remained even. "Your Honor, with respect, the complexity lies not in the individual transactions, but in how they were concealed through a network of shell companies specifically designed to—" "Let me guess," Judge Black interjected, leaning forward, "designed to evade regulatory oversight. How groundbreaking." She glanced at the gallery with a knowing smile, inviting them to join in her derision. "Ms. Bondi, we're all familiar with the basic concept of corporate veils. This court's time is valuable." A defense attorney chuckled audibly. Judge Black did nothing to discourage the disrespectful atmosphere that was rapidly developing. Bondi closed her folder. "Your Honor, I believe the evidence itself will demonstrate the significance of these structures. If I may proceed with calling our first witness?" "By all means," Judge Black sighed theatrically, "though I hope your questioning will be more substantive than your opening." As Bondi called the SEC forensic accountant to the stand, Judge Black made a show of checking her watch. When the witness described finding irregularities in Brighton's offshore accounts, the judge interrupted again, this time for the benefit of Ms. Bondi, who may not be familiar with sophisticated financial instruments, as she put it. "Perhaps you could explain these concepts in more accessible terms," Judge Black suggested. The witness looked uncomfortable at being enlisted in the judge's mockery. Throughout the questioning, Judge Black peppered the proceedings with similar comments, each one undermining Bondi's authority and competence. Yet something remarkable was happening. With each interruption, with each public humiliation, Bondi's demeanor grew more focused, not flustered. She adjusted her approach methodically, anticipating the judge's interruptions and working around them with practiced skill. In the press gallery, a veteran legal correspondent from the Washington Post frowned slightly. Having covered dozens of Bondi's cases, he recognized a particular quality in her composure. Not the stiff resistance of someone weathering criticism, but the patient calculation of someone waiting for precisely the right moment to strike. 3 hours into the proceedings, the dynamic in the courtroom shifted. Bondi approached the bench with a thick legal volume in hand. "Your Honor, before we continue with witness testimony, I'd like to address a procedural matter concerning evidence admissibility." Judge Black made no effort to hide her impatience. "Make it quick, Miss Bondi. I'm citing Kellerman versus United States, 1987. Bondi began, her finger moving to a specific passage, a relatively obscure decision from the Second Circuit, but particularly relevant here. The judge's eyebrows rose slightly. "Kellerman. That case concerned maritime jurisdiction, Miss Bondi, hardly relevant to corporate fraud." A small, almost imperceptible smile touched Bondi's lips. "With respect, Your Honor, while Kellerman began as a maritime case, the appellate decision established important precedent regarding evidence obtained through regulatory inspections conducted without proper notification. Precisely the situation with the SEC's examination of Brighton's overseas operations." For the first time that day, Judge Black appeared momentarily unsure. Furthermore, Bondi continued, opening a second book, in Hamilton Trust versus Commissioner, 2002, the court held that regulatory powers, when exercised beyond statutory limitations, cannot serve as the foundation for subsequent prosecution. I would direct the court's attention to page 347, paragraph 3. The defense attorneys were no longer smiling. One frantically searched through his own materials, a look of concern crossing his face. "I am well versed in Hamilton Trust, Miss Bondi," Judge Black responded, though she accepted the offered volume and studied the passage. "Then the court is also familiar with Judge Thornton's concurring opinion," Bondi said, "which specifically addresses the issue of jurisdictional overreach in cases involving multinational corporate structures." Bondi's question was delivered with perfect, professional courtesy, but the challenge it carried was unmistakable. A law clerk behind Judge Black was typing furiously, then slid a note across to the judge. Her eyes widened slightly as she read it. "In light of these precedents," Bondi pressed on, "I would like to submit that the evidence obtained from Brighton's Singapore subsidiary falls squarely within the Hamilton Trust restriction." She paused meaningfully. "Unless the court has already made a determination regarding the application of the multinational corporate veil doctrine, as outlined in Westmoreland International 2018. A quiet gasp came from the gallery, where several legal scholars sat. A professor from Columbia Law whispered to his colleague, "She's right. Black can't have it both ways on the jurisdictional question." The judge's earlier smugness had vanished. "Miss Bondi, are you suggesting this court has ruled inconsistently on this doctrine?" "Not at all, Your Honor," Bondi replied smoothly. "I'm merely establishing the proper framework for admissibility before we proceed. In fact, Your Honor's own ruling in United States versus De La Cruz last year seemed to support the narrower interpretation of regulatory authority." The courtroom grew utterly silent. The judge's face flushed as she realized Bondi had thoroughly researched her prior decisions and had found a potential contradiction. "I will take these citations under advisement," Judge Black said stiffly. "We'll take a 30-minute recess." As the judge departed, urgent whispers erupted throughout the courtroom. The defense team huddled in concerned conversation. Journalists who had expected to witness Bondi's humiliation were already revising their narratives. Bondi calmly returned to the prosecution table, arranging her materials with the same methodical precision she had shown at the beginning of the day. But now, observers noted a subtle shift in how others regarded her. The dismissive smirks had been replaced by cautious respect. The tide was turning. When Judge Black returned after the recess, the atmosphere had noticeably changed. Her usual commanding presence seemed slightly diminished as she shuffled her papers with uncharacteristic hesitation. The gallery, once entertained by her mockery of Bondi, now watched with heightened attention, sensing the shift in the power dynamic. "The court has reviewed the precedents cited by Ms. Bondi," Judge Black announced, her voice lacking its earlier confidence. "While I maintain they are not entirely on point, I will allow the prosecution to continue, with the understanding that admissibility questions remain under review." Bondi rose, nodding respectfully. "Thank you, Your Honor. The prosecution calls Raymond Wires, former Chief Financial Officer of Brighton Development's Asia-Pacific Division." As the witness was sworn in, Bondi methodically arranged her evidence binders. The defense team's lead counsel leaned forward, suddenly alert to the dangerous precision in Bondi's movements. Gone was any trace of the supposedly outmatched prosecutor they had expected. "Mr. Wires," Bondi began, "could you explain your role in establishing the financial reporting structure between Brighton's Singapore office and its Delaware headquarters?" Judge Black interrupted almost immediately. "Miss Bondi, we've already established the corporate structure. Let's not waste time retreading ground." "With respect, Your Honor," Bondi replied calmly, "this line of questioning directly addresses the jurisdictional issues raised in our discussion of the Hamilton Trust. If I may continue." The judge's lips tightened, but she nodded curtly. As Wires began describing complex international transactions, Judge Black's frustration grew increasingly apparent. Twice she tried to redirect Bondi's questioning, only to have Bondi respectfully but firmly tie her inquiries back to the previously cited legal precedents. When the judge tried to exclude a set of documents as irrelevant, Bundy immediately referenced Federal Rule of Evidence 836, along with an obscure exception, established in a Second Circuit case directly applicable to their current venue. "Your Honor is certainly familiar with Judge Moskowitz's ruling in Brennan v. Global Financial," Bondi asked, her tone innocent but her eyes sharp with challenge. A clerk approached the bench and discreetly passed Judge Black a folded note. As she read it, her complexion paled slightly. Whatever the message contained, it clearly unsettled her. The gallery began to buzz. A court sketch artist captured the judge's increasingly troubled expression. Defense attorneys exchanged worried glances as they watched their expected advantage slip away. "Miss Bondi," Judge Black said, her voice now strained, "this court is well aware of the Brennan decision. Please continue with your witness." Bondi nodded and turned back to Wires. "Mr. Wires, did you ever receive direct communication from Judge Black regarding the structure of Brighton's offshore accounts prior to the commencement of this case?" A collective gasp swept through the courtroom. "Objection!" The defense team leapt to their feet. Judge Black's gavel slammed down with such force that its head cracked. "Miss Bondi, that question is entirely inappropriate and borders on contempt." Bondi remained unruffled. "Your Honor, I have documentation suggesting communications between your chambers and Brighton Development executives dating back 18 months, which would constitute ex parte contact relevant to this proceeding." The judge's face flushed, deep red. "Those allegations are completely unfounded. I will not allow—" "In that case, Your Honor," Bondi interrupted smoothly, "would you be willing to submit to a review of your communications by the Chief Judge of this district? If my information is incorrect, I would face sanctions for making false claims against the court." The tension in the room was now electric. A senior FBI agent in the back row quietly spoke into his phone. his eyes never leaving Judge Black's increasingly flustered face. This court will take another recess, Judge Black managed, her voice unsteady. 1 hour, my chambers, now! She hissed to her clerks as she rose, nearly knocking over her water glass in her haste to leave. As the judge disappeared through the door behind the bench, the courtroom erupted in astonished murmurs. Bondi calmly returned to her table, ignoring the stunned stares directed her way. No one noticed the 2 U.S. Marshals who quietly entered through a side door, positioning themselves near the judge's chambers. The hour-long recess stretched to 90 minutes, then to 2 hours. In the courtroom, speculation ran wild. Journalists huddled in corners, making urgent calls to their editors. The defense team had gone from confident to ashen-faced, several attorneys making hasty exits, only to return looking even more distressed. When the doors finally opened, it wasn't Judge Black who entered. It was Chief Judge Robert Montgomery, the senior judicial officer for the district. His grave expression silenced the room instantly. "This court will come to order," the clerk announced, though his voice wavered. Chief Judge Montgomery took his place at the bench. "Due to extraordinary circumstances, I will be presiding over these proceedings for the remainder of the day. Judge Black is temporarily relieved of her duties, pending an investigation." The gallery erupted in shocked whispers. Montgomery struck the gavel once, restoring order. "Miss Bondi, I understand. You have evidence you wish to submit to this court?" Bondi rose, her composure unwavering despite the dramatic turn of events. "Yes, Your Honor. The prosecution submits as evidence this sealed packet of communications between Judge Jessica Black and 3 executives of Brighton Development Corporation, dated between March of last year and 2 weeks ago." She approached the bench, handing over a thick manila envelope secured with evidence tape. Behind her, a federal agent carried a digital forensics case. "These communications were discovered during our investigation into Brighton's internal messaging system," Bondi continued. "They reveal not only ex parte discussions about this case, but also evidence of financial transactions between an offshore account linked to Judge Black and a shell company controlled by Brighton Development." Gasps and exclamations filled the room. A woman in the gallery stood up and rushed out, nearly tripping in her haste. Chief Judge Montgomery broke the seal on the envelope and began reviewing its contents. His expression grew darker with each page. After several tense minutes, he looked up. "Miss Bondi, when did you become aware of these communications?" 3 days ago, Your Honor. We immediately notified the FBI and the Department of Justice's Public Integrity Section. Given the sensitive nature of the allegations, we followed protocol for judicial misconduct investigations, which required confidentiality until the evidence could be properly secured. The defense team was now in complete chaos, frantically whispering and passing notes. Their lead counsel finally stood. "Your Honor, we request an immediate recess to review this new evidence and its implications for our..." "Client's request is denied," Montgomery replied firmly. "This court is now primarily concerned with the integrity of these proceedings." He turned to Bondi. "Please continue with your presentation of evidence." Bondi nodded to the federal agent, who connected a laptop to the courtroom's display. System. Email threads appeared on the screen, showing correspondence between Judge Black and Brighton's CFO. The emails discussed the case in explicit detail, including how certain rulings would be handled. Next came banking records showing transfers of over $2.3 million to an account in the Cayman Islands, followed by documents linking that account to a trust benefiting Judge Black's family. The prosecutors handling the case against Brighton appeared as shocked as everyone else. Clearly, Bondi had kept this investigation compartmentalized, revealing it even to her own team only when absolutely necessary. "As you can see, Your Honor," Bondi continued, her voice steady and clinical, "these communications constitute clear violations of judicial ethics and potentially criminal behavior under 18 U.S.C. Section 201, the Federal Bribery Statute. Chief Judge Montgomery nodded grimly. "I've seen enough to take immediate action." He turned to his clerk. "Please contact the U.S. Marshal Service. Judge Black is not to leave the building." A prosecutor from Bondi's team approached the bench with additional documents. "Your Honor, we have prepared a formal complaint and arrest warrant request based on this evidence." Montgomery reviewed the papers, his expression grave. "The evidence appears substantial and concerning, enough to merit immediate action." He signed the document and handed it to the clerk. Throughout this extraordinary turn of events, Pam Bondi maintained her professional demeanor, though keen observers might have noticed the slight satisfaction in her eyes as years of being underestimated culminated in this moment of vindication. In Judge Black's chambers, oblivious to what was transpiring in her courtroom, the judge was frantically deleting emails from her government computer. The courtroom had transformed into a hub of urgent activity. Chief Judge Montgomery had cleared all spectators except for essential personnel, but the hallways outside buzzed with reporters and legal observers trying to piece together what was happening behind the closed doors. Inside, a team from the FBI's Public Corruption Unit had arrived with digital forensics equipment. Technicians in blue windbreakers methodically documented and secured electronic devices from Judge Black's chambers, while investigators cross-referenced Bondi's evidence against federal databases in real time. The timestamps match perfectly, a forensic analyst reported, comparing the communication logs with data on her screen. These messages were exchanged during critical periods of case management, including when defense motions were being considered. Chief Judge Montgomery, now seated at a conference table rather than the bench, nodded grimly. A Treasury Department official, summoned from the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, consulted his secured tablet. "We've confirmed 6 transfers, totaling $2.7 million. Slightly more than Ms. Bondi's initial estimate, the money moved through 3 jurisdictions before reaching the Cayman account." Bondi stood quietly near the prosecution table, occasionally conferring with the lead FBI agent, but otherwise allowing the investigation to unfold without interference. The meticulous case she had built spoke for itself. Through the glass partition separating the courtroom from the judge's private corridor, they could see Judge Black in animated conversation with her staff. Her arms gesticulated wildly, her face contorted with panic. A court clerk exited her chambers and approached Chief Judge Montgomery, his expression troubled. "Sir, Judge Black is requesting to speak with you privately. She says there's been a misunderstanding." Montgomery exchanged glances with the lead federal prosecutor. "Not appropriate at this time. Inform Judge Black that she should contact her attorney immediately." "She's already called the district attorney," the clerk reported nervously. Bondi raised an eyebrow. "The district attorney has no jurisdiction here. This is a federal matter." The investigation continued with methodical precision. Each piece of evidence Bondi had gathered was scrutinized, verified, and added to the growing case against Judge Black. What emerged was a pattern of corruption, spanning at least 4 major cases, with the Brighton development matter being only the most recent. "We've accessed the electronic docket management system," an FBI cybersecurity specialist announced. "There's evidence of selective reassignment of cases to Judge Black's calendar, cases specifically involving corporations with connections to that same Cayman Islands account." Chief Judge Montgomery rubbed his temples. "This is worse than I imagined. The damage to the court's reputation will be extensive." "There's more," said a Justice Department attorney who'd been reviewing emails recovered from the server backups. "We found communication suggesting Judge Black deliberately delayed rulings in the Westerman antitrust case last year, delays that coincided with significant stock trades benefiting Brighton subsidiaries. Inside her chambers, Judge Black was visibly crumbling under pressure. Through the glass, they could see her pacing frantically, occasionally glancing toward the courtroom with increasing desperation. A senior clerk emerged from her office and spoke quietly to the lead agent. Judge Black is attempting to access the secure judicial network from her personal device, he reported. She's trying to modify docket entries from previous cases. The agent nodded to his technical team, locked down her access credentials immediately. Outside in the hallway, the murmurs grew louder as word spread that something unprecedented was occurring within the courthouse. Several Brighton executives, who had been present for the morning session, were seen hurriedly leaving the building, pursued by reporters shouting questions about their relationship with Judge Black. "We've completed our preliminary review," the lead agent finally announced, turning to Chief Judge Montgomery. "Based on the evidence Ms. Bondi provided and our initial corroboration, we have more than sufficient probable cause for an arrest." Montgomery nodded solemnly. "Then proceed. As the law requires, no one, especially not a federal judge, stands above justice." As two U.S. Marshals moved toward Judge Black's chambers, Bondi gathered her materials, her expression revealing nothing of what she must have felt witnessing the fall of a judge who had so publicly ridiculed her just hours before. Chapter 7. The arrest order. The courtroom doors opened with a heavy finality as two U.S. Marshals and an FBI agent entered Judge Black's chambers. The remaining spectators in the hallway pressed against the barriers, straining to glimpse the unfolding drama. Inside the main courtroom, Chief Judge Montgomery stood solemnly. "This court will reconvene," he announced, his voice carrying the weight of institutional responsibility. The doors to the chambers swung open. Judge Jessica Black emerged, flanked by law enforcement officers. Her face, previously animated with condescension, now appeared ashen. Her hands trembled visibly as she clutched a designer handbag to her chest like a shield. "Your Honor," the lead marshal addressed Chief Judge Montgomery, not the woman whose title had effectively been stripped away moments earlier. "We've secured the subject's personal electronic devices as instructed." Black's eyes darted frantically around the courtroom, lingering momentarily on Pam Bondi, who stood quietly at the prosecution table. The recognition in her gaze that Bondi had orchestrated this moment not through vindictiveness, but through meticulous legal work, seemed to break something fundamental in her composure. "This is absurd," Black finally managed, her voice cracking. "I've served on this bench for 15 years. You can't possibly—" "Jessica Black," the FBI agent interrupted, reading formally from an arrest warrant. "You are under arrest for violations of Title 18, United States Code Section 201, accepting bribes as a public official. Title 18, United States Code Section 1956, money laundering, and Title 18, United States Code Section 1512, obstruction of justice." A collective gasp rippled through the courtroom. Several junior attorneys who had appeared before Judge Black looked physically ill as they watched their mentor's dramatic fall. "You have the right to remain silent," the agent continued, reciting the Miranda warnings as the marshal produced handcuffs. "This is outrageous. You can't put those on me in my own courtroom," Black protested, backing away. Chief Judge Montgomery spoke, his voice heavy. "This is no longer your courtroom, Ms. Black." The sound of metal clasping around. Her wrists echoed in the silent chamber. Judge Black, now simply Defendant Black, stood in shocked disbelief as the cold reality of her situation finally settled upon her. The black robes that had symbolized her authority now seemed like a theatrical costume. "Counsel should be prepared to appear before the magistrate judge within the hour," the marshal announced to the room at large, though his words were clearly directed at Black. "The defendant will be processed according to standard protocol." As they led her toward the side exit reserved for judicial personnel, Black twisted to look back at Bondi. "You planned this," she hissed, anger briefly overcoming her shock. "You set me up."